Okay, let's move on to U.S. Steel. This is a big and a major story. U.S. Steel, of course, probably one of the most important companies in the history of the United States, and I'm not exaggerating that. Has had its ups and downs, I think it's fair to say, in its 102-year history, or 122-year history, but recently is really in the center of what I think will become a major political firestorm and highlights all of the perils, I think, of the international financial system. So first, let's start with the news. Let's put this up there on the screen. A surprise announcement yesterday that Nippon Steel, which is a Japanese steel conglomerate, will acquire U.S. Steel for $14.1 billion in cash. It's an all-cash deal that is being floated here. Now, the reason why this is important, Krystal, is that U.S. Steel has found itself in a couple of different problems and over the last couple of years. Just recently, they actually were offered a cash and a stock deal for half of this amount of some $7 billion. So why does it make sense for this Japanese company to come in and pay $14 billion? There's a couple of really interesting things about this. Number one, Japanese Steel, or Nippon Steel, I think Nippon is the word for Japan in Japanese. Nippon Steel is a Japanese government-backed steel company. It's basically a piece and a tool of Japanese industrial policy. What they have looked at is that U.S. Steel is set to benefit from Inflation Reduction Act infrastructure spending. So what this Japanese company says is, our steel production is very low. We are competing against China, which is one of the #1 steel producers in the world. The US government is about to hand a bunch of money to US Steel. So what do? We buy US Steel at a premium, and we are gonna reap all of the benefits, economic benefits, to the Japanese shareholders and government of US infrastructure spending. And at the same time, US Steel, which is probably the single most critical national security industry, will now be directly controlled by a foreign government. Now, the counter to what I'm saying is, what do you care? Japan is one of our closest allies. I agree, but just because you're a close ally doesn't mean that you should be controlling the backbone of American steel industry and of American industrial policy on top of some of the most important union jobs in the entire country. And it's not just me who is saying this. Senator John Fetterman, Senator J.D. Vance, and Senator Josh Hawley have all now spoken out against the deal. Fetterman in particular actually put this in very good terms. Here's what he had to say.
And I just have to say it's absolutely outrageous that they have sold themselves to a foreign nation and a company. Can't do that. Steel is always about security as well too. And I am committed to doing anything I can do from using my platform or my position in order to block this. And I'm going to fight for the steel workers and their union way of life here as well too. And we cannot ever allow them to be screwed over or left behind.
He is highlighting an important point, which we'll get to, is that the Steelworkers Union was not consulted by Nippon Steel management before the sale. Senator Vance also put out a statement. Let's go and put this up on the screen. He says, a critical piece of America's defense industrial base was just auctioned off to foreigners for cash. I warned of this outcome months ago. Rest assured, I will interrogate the long-term implications for the American people. So this is going to go to President Biden and to the Treasury Department for approval of this deal through something of it's a review process where any company which is critical to national security gets to either veto or approve the sale to a foreign company. And last but not least here, just to highlight again the workers, let's put this up there. The USW, the United Steelworkers Union, put out a statement slamming it. Say we're disappointed in the deal is an understatement. It demonstrates the same greedy, short-sighted attitude that guided US Steel for far too long. We remain open throughout this process to working with US Steel to keep this iconic American company domestically owned and operated. And instead, it chose to push aside the concerns of its workforce and sell to a foreign-owned company. Neither US or Nippon reached out to our union regarding the deal, which in itself is a violation of our partnership agreement and requires US Steel to notify us of a change in control or business conditions. And I think that highlights it really for me, is that they didn't consult the workers. Clearly, this is a major national security threat. And I have, again, nothing against Japan, but you need to ask yourself, why is the Japanese government willing to pay double what a US company is for their own national security implications? Because, you know, it's a small island and they want as much control of supply as possible. I don't blame them. I would try to do the same thing if I were them. But we got to look out for our own interests. And I hope that this becomes a major thing here in Washington with these 3 senators who are speaking out. I would expect people like Sherrod Brown and others, especially as union workers themselves. I mean, this is what destroyed the union way of life. Yeah, is you know, Chinese, Mexican outsourcing. And Japan, I mean, you know, turn the clock back to the 1980s, this was what they were doing back then. We had the infiltration of Toyota and all these other companies that make great cars, but nothing against them on a production level, but just in terms of U.S. market share and U.S. control, it's never been worse than right now.
And it makes sense that Fetterman, who if you consult yesterday's show, you will see I have
yes,
a lot of criticisms of these days, but that he has a sort of emotional connection to this company, these workers, et cetera. I used to live in the greater Pittsburgh area, and the steel industry is huge. I mean, in terms of the sort of like cultural understanding of the place and how people see themselves. U.S. Steel being the most iconic of the American steel companies. And now, if this deal goes through, which let's be clear, Biden should block this deal, 100% he should block this deal. And the fact that you have some bipartisan support for blocking this deal, I would hope would encourage him to move in this direction. The number one steel maker in the world is China Baowu Group. Number two is ArcelorMittal, which is Indian. And then number three would be this Japanese steel company. So, it gets to the core of some of the problems with just the neoliberal view of shareholder value and globalism over and profits over literally anything else. That's the sort of thinking that would lead you to say, yes, this is acceptable and it's fine for us to just, sell our defense industrial base off to the highest bidder wherever that comes from. I am hoping that there's been somewhat of a shift within both of the parties where they see the problems with that direction ultimately. But, for me, it's also actually very personal because I did used to live in this area. And, it used to be, Saagar, you were talking about like the decline of the middle class and the end of the union way of life and all of those sorts of things. It used to be in this town that I lived in, there was a large steel mill. People could basically graduate high school, walk across the street, get a good job at the steel mill. I mean, this is tough work. Let's be clear. This was not like, a picnic.
It's
very difficult. It's dangerous, et cetera. But you could afford a house. You could afford a vacation. You could afford to support a family on one income. And then, that basically went away. And that steel mill is all but shuttered at this point. It also, I believe, was sold to a foreign buyer as well. And that area of the country has been thoroughly decimated by the outsourcing and destruction of those jobs. What also makes this noteworthy at this point is that you've had now two successive administrations trying to rebuild American steel. So Trump imposed a 25% tariff on most steel imports, trying to, it's a bit of a protectionist action to try to bolster American steel. Trump and Biden later renegotiated many of those tariffs into quota arrangements in which foreign governments agreed to limit the amount of steel they exported to the U.S. And as you pointed out, Saagar, the infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act both were meant to drive up steel demand and prices by limiting competition from foreign markets. But they clearly did not do enough to forestall this type of outcome from occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, the main thing that we need to prevent is that U.S. Steel doesn't go in the way of Bethlehem Steel. I've actually visited Bethlehem Steel. My in-laws are from the region. It's actually a fascinating thing. I hope that everybody get to go and see the steel stacks. It was a huge part of the U.S. industrial base at that time. And the story of it is really sad. I mean, this was, the I-beam, it's very famous. I even have a t-shirt with the I-beam on it. And, it was critical for World War I, World War II. It helped rebuild all of Europe. And then what happens? We rebuild Europe and Japan so well that by the 1970s, U.S. steel is actually too expensive. Bethlehem Steel and U.S.-based produced steel is too expensive to the overall global market. And that's when the era of neoliberalism and globalism comes in, and we allow Bethlehem Steel to basically go under. And you guys want to know when Bethlehem Steel is today? It's a freaking casino. And it's like a casino and a wedding venue. It's nice, by the way. It's actually really cool, especially the party area and all of that. But they've got markets and there's no steel. The steel production facility is a place that you go and you take a photo of. That's really sad that we've basically turned it into a place of gambling and financialization. Yeah, basically a museum, as well as Mack Truck and some of the other things in the area, as opposed to a place where it actually produced things. And the entire industry of that region, the history of it, was deeply linked to production. Production itself is so important. And the original reason why Bethlehem Steel flourished in the first place was because we had it here, we could control it, we could use it whenever we got caught flat-footed and we had to rebuild for World War II and we had to put all these tanks and all this stuff. Where do you think it comes from? We are think too about the global supply chain. about what have we been covering here? All of this craziness going on in the Red Sea. You and I were talking privately yesterday about the Straits of Malacca, the Taiwan Strait. I mean, the era of international conflict on the high seas seems to be back, and the level of precarity in it from conflict is something that people really don't appreciate. Like, if any one of those were to close or to pop off, not only would global inflation spike, I mean, theoretically, huge portions of the US economy would just go under overnight. That's because of globalization that we've allowed to occur. So whether the Japanese promise to keep the jobs here or any of that, it's about control, and it's about who actually is here in the US, and about critical decisions and relations with governments. And their government wants to buy it for a reason. So we should think about that, and we should say maybe we're the ones who should control it in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, it's honestly about like the basics of statehood.
Yes.
Do you have control? Do you have the capacity, if you need, to spin up production? And, we've been thinking about statehood in the context of Palestinians. And so it's made me think a lot about, like, what are the components of actually having a real legitimate state? And, having control over your own defense industrial base seems like a pretty critical component of that, especially for a wealthy, advanced nation such as ours, and one that we've obviously lost sight of now for decades at this point.
Yeah.
Saagar, I wonder if you have any insight into whether you think Biden will block this, because I actually think that there's a chance, just because his own sort of personal self-conception and the way that he has been framing his economic pitch. Blocking it, to me, would be consistent with some of the other elements of Bidenomics.
I don't think he'll block it because it's an ally, and because so it's not just about Biden, it's about CFIUS, which is the actual board inside of the Treasury Department, which will review all of this. The framework that you and I are talking about does not exist. The only framework that they have is, threat, okay, we'll nix that. And that actually took a decade to get to the point where we would block anything that's coming in from China. If it was Saudi Arabia or any other country, we would probably block it. But Japan is just considered such a bedrock US ally, and they're saying all the right things. They're like, don't worry, we'll keep the jobs here. Hey, we're doing this because you guys are spending money. It's all good. We'll work with this, the union, etc. That within the new neoliberal view where we acknowledge that China is on the outs, but everything else is allowed, I don't see Janet Yellen and others blocking this transaction.
On the other hand, even just from naked, cynical political calculation, as I said, this is such an important part of the identity of Western Pennsylvania.
I would hope so.
In and around the Pittsburgh area, which obviously a critical swing state. That area is in particular critical for Democratic performance. And you have, the union that is adamantly opposed and speaking out as forcefully as they possibly can. A union which I'm not sure if the steelworkers have backed Biden yet for his reelection bid, but they were certainly behind him last time around, and he has close ties with union leaders there and at other unions as well. So that's why I don't put it totally off the table that he could make the right decision here.
It's possible. I would hope so. And look, the more that we see this type of action, we need, bipartisan, we need people like Sherrod Brown to come out. We need many other swing states, Bob Casey and others. If it becomes mobilized, and if you people actually make this known that you care about something like this, or you know somebody in the area and the union way of life, all these things depend on you. Not to mention, the overall national security. We could get it done, but I am really not hopeful, just because capital wants this. If you're a U.S. Steel shareholder, this is the best thing that ever happened to you. You just got 100% premium on your stock. And these people are about to make a lot of money. So if you think that they're going to allow $7 billion in profits just to go idly by because some YouTubers and a couple of senators say something, they're going to fight, I think, tooth and nail to make sure this goes.
Imagine if Scranton Joe
is
the one that allows the sale of U.S. steel to a foreign country to go through.
All right.
Stranger things have happened. Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.